I'm Rachel, 36, and standing in that Michelin-starred restaurant watching my husband of 12 years raise his crystal champagne flute. I felt like I was watching someone I didn't recognize. To Amanda, who knows me better than anyone, he said, his eyes locked on his gorgeous coworker, not even glancing at me. $8,000 of my money, months of secret planning, and an empty seat beside me as he moved to sit by her. The worst part wasn't the toast, but realizing from everyone's reactions that I was the only one surprised by it. Before I continue this story about how my perfect marriage crumbled in one horrifying evening, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if family drama stories like mine resonate with you. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this betrayal led to the most satisfying revenge I never thought I had in me. I grew up in a modest middle-class family in Portland. My parents were practical people who taught me the value of hard work and financial independence from an early age. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through college, graduating with a business degree and only minimal student debt. I was proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. I met James at a corporate mixer 14 years ago. He was 38 when everything fell apart, but back then he was 26 and the most charming man in any room. His confidence drew me in immediately. He had these ambitious plans for his future that made my practical heart skip a beat. We clicked instantly, sharing dreams over cheap wine in my tiny apartment, planning weekend hikes, and fantasizing about the places we'd travel together someday. After we married 2 years later, I continued climbing the ladder at my financial advisory firm. I specialized in high-net-worth clients, and eventually became one of the top advisors at our prestigious firm. James, meanwhile, had a more flexible career path. He tried his hand at sales, then marketing, then briefly considered starting his own business. Each venture began with enthusiasm, but somehow never quite panned out. When he decided to pursue his MBA, I supported him completely. I covered our living expenses, paid his tuition, and never once complained about the long hours I worked to make it all possible. I believed in him. I believed in us. During those early years, our marriage felt perfect despite the financial imbalance. We hosted cozy dinner parties in our small apartment, spent weekends hiking in the nearby mountains, and seemed completely aligned on our goals. We decided early on not to have children, focusing instead on our careers, traveling, and building financial independence. James always said he wanted to be established in his career before considering fatherhood. I respected that and honestly enjoyed our child-free lifestyle. We had freedom, flexibility, and each other. What more did we need? After James completed his MBA, which I largely funded, I helped him network with my clients to find opportunities. When he finally landed a marketing position at a growing firm, I felt a surge of pride. He had found his place, or so I thought. He threw himself into the new role with infectious enthusiasm. As my income continued to grow, we purchased a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood. I put down most of the down payment and covered about 70% of our monthly expenses, but I never resented it. Marriage is partnership, and I thought we were building something special together. The first subtle signs of trouble appeared about 18 months ago. James started working later, claiming client dinners and networking events. He developed expensive new tastes, commenting on wines I should try or restaurants we should visit. Small criticisms about my clothing or our home decor slipped into conversations. I brushed these changes off, attributing them to his newfound professional confidence and success. My close friend Lauren tried to warn me during a girls' night about 6 months ago. "Have you noticed how James barely speaks to you at parties anymore?" she asked carefully. I laughed it off, saying he was just networking for his career. But her words stuck with me, and I started noticing how he would drift away from me at social gatherings, always ending up deep in conversation with colleagues, while I chatted with our old friends. That's when I decided to plan something special for his upcoming 40th birthday. I wanted to reignite our connection, remind him of everything we meant to each other, and celebrate how far we'd come together. I would spare no expense to make it perfect. Looking back, I realize I was trying to buy back his attention with an extravagant gesture. What a fool I was. Planning James's 40th birthday celebration became my secret mission. I wanted it to be unforgettable, a reminder of how much I valued him and our life together. I started saving from my personal account 6 months in advance, setting aside bonuses and cutting back on my own expenses without him noticing. Securing a reservation at Élysée was no small feat. It was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, boasting 2 Michelin stars, and a waiting list that stretched months. I called daily for weeks until a cancellation opened up exactly on James's birthday. When the hostess confirmed our date, I nearly cried with relief. It felt like a sign that my plan would work. I spent hours coordinating with James's colleagues and our friends for the guest list. I wanted to surround him with people who mattered to him, people who had been part of our journey together. I limited the group to 16, making it intimate enough for meaningful conversation, but festive enough for a proper celebration. The meeting with Chef Pascal was particularly memorable. He welcomed me into the kitchen during a quiet afternoon to discuss the personalized tasting menu. I shared James's favorite flavors and food memories, watching as he scribbled notes and suggested wine pairings. When I mentioned James's love for black truffle, Chef Pascal's eyes lit up as he described a special dish he could create just for our evening. Finding James's favorite wine proved challenging. The 2005 Chateau Margaux he had once tasted at a client event and couldn't stop talking about was rare and expensive. I contacted 7 different wine merchants before locating 3 bottles, paying nearly $1.200 each. The price made me wince, but I imagined his face when he recognized the label, and it seemed worth every penny. 2 weeks before the big night, I went shopping for a new dress. I chose a midnight blue silk that made my eyes look brighter and hugged my figure in a way that reminded me of the woman I was when we first met. The saleswoman commented on how lucky my husband was, and I smiled, imagining his reaction when he saw me in it. As the day approached, my nervousness and excitement grew in equal measure. We had been drifting apart in small, almost imperceptible ways, and I convinced myself this evening would bring us back together. I imagined intimate conversations over exquisite food, reminiscing about our early days, and reconnecting as we looked toward our future. The morning of his birthday, I left a card on his pillow with a simple note: "Happy birthday, my love. Tonight is all about celebrating you." He texted me a quick thanks from work, mentioning he'd be home late to get ready because of an important client meeting. I didn't mind. I wanted everything to be a surprise. I spent hours getting ready, taking care with my makeup and hair in a way I hadn't for months. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Tonight would change things. Tonight would remind him of us. When James finally arrived home, he seemed distracted as he rushed to shower and dress. When I revealed we were heading to Élysée, his reaction wasn't quite what I'd expected. Rather than excitement, there was a flash of something like alarm before he composed himself. Wow, Rachel. That's a serious reservation. Who's coming?" he asked, as he adjusted his tie. I showed him the guest list I'd so carefully curated. He scanned it quickly, then frowned. "We should add a few more people from my team. It would be good networking." Before I could object, he was texting additions to the reservation. 3 more colleagues, including someone named Amanda Davis, whom he described as crucial to the Miller account. The name meant nothing to me then. I wish it had stayed that way. We arrived at Élysée 30 minutes before our reservation. The maitre d' greeted us by name and led us to a private dining room adorned with subtle lighting, fresh flowers, and a stunning view of the city skyline. Crystal glasses sparkled on the immaculately set table, and a discreet pianist played in the corner. Everything was perfect. I squeezed James's hand, but he was already checking his phone. Guests began arriving, each exclaiming over the opulent setting. James greeted them warmly, instantly becoming the charming host I remembered from our dinner parties years ago. I felt a wave of relief, seeing him so engaged and happy. This was working already. Then Amanda walked in. She was stunning in that effortless way some women manage, with sleek dark hair cascading over one shoulder of her burgundy dress. At 32, she radiated confidence that made the room seem suddenly smaller. I watched James's entire demeanor transform the moment she appeared. His smile widened, his posture straightened, and something in his eyes changed, becoming more alive than I'd seen in months. "Amanda, you found us," he called out, moving away from the conversation he'd been having with our old friends. I watched confused as he guided her to the table, pulling out a chair beside his own, at the head of the table, leaving me to sit across from them rather than next to my husband. The disruption to the seating arrangement I'd planned should have been my first clear warning, but I was still determined to salvage the evening. I smiled tightly and introduced myself, extending my hand. "I'm Rachel, James's wife. So glad you could join us." Her handshake was firm, her smile practiced. "I've heard so much about you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "James talks about you all the time at the office." As the first course arrived, I tried to reclaim some control over the evening, standing to welcome everyone and thank them for coming. James barely seemed to notice, already deep in conversation with Amanda, their heads tilted toward each other in conspiratorial closeness. The seven-course meal was a masterpiece of culinary art. Delicate sea scallops with citrus foam, duck breast with cherry reduction, the black truffle risotto that Chef Pascal had created especially for James. Each dish arrived with a perfectly paired wine, including the rare Chateau Margaux, that cost as much as some people's monthly rent. But as the evening progressed, my appetite vanished. From my seat across the table, I had a perfect view of James and Amanda's growing intimacy. Their shoulders touched as they leaned toward each other. They shared private jokes that required no words, just a glance and a smile. When he reached for his water glass, his fingers brushed against hers in a way that seemed too deliberate to be accidental. "Did you see the numbers on the Miller proposal?" she asked him during the third course. "I made the changes you suggested last night." Genius move on the distribution strategy. Last night I stared at them, remembering how James had told me he was working late with the team. There had been no mention of Amanda specifically, no indication he'd been working one-on-one with her well into the evening. "We make a good team," James replied, his voice dropping to a register I recognized from our own intimate moments. Always in sync. I caught fragments of their conversation throughout dinner, references to shared lunches, inside jokes about colleagues' plans for an upcoming presentation. Each revelation was another small cut. How had I not known about any of this? The worst part was watching our friends' reactions. No one seemed surprised by James and Amanda's behavior. Lauren kept shooting me sympathetic glances. Michael, James's friend since college, suddenly became very interested in his plate when James brushed Amanda's hair back from her face with familiar ease. They all knew. Every single person at that table knew, except me. When the dessert course arrived, James stood and raised his glass. This was it, I thought. The moment when he would thank me for planning this evening, acknowledge our years together, express appreciation for the loving gesture this dinner represented. Instead, he turned toward Amanda. "I'd like to make a toast to someone special," he began, his eyes never leaving her face. "To Amanda, who knows me better than anyone, who challenges me every day to be my best self, who always sees the real me, the real him." 12 years of marriage, and he was telling a room full of people that this woman he worked with knew him better than his own wife. The room grew quiet. A few uncomfortable coughs broke the silence. I felt Lauren reach under the table and squeeze my hand in silent support. I couldn't look at her or anyone else. I sat frozen champagne glass half raised as James continued praising Amanda's brilliance, her insight, her understanding. Not once during his 2-minute toast did he glance in my direction or mention me. When he finished, Amanda beamed at him, touching his arm in a gesture so intimate it felt obscene. I excused myself to the bathroom, legs unsteady as I navigated between tables. In the elegant marble restroom, I gripped the sink and stared at my reflection. The woman who looked back seemed like a stranger, her carefully applied makeup now emphasizing her shock and humiliation. As I tried to compose myself, the bathroom door opened, and 2 women I didn't recognize entered, continuing a conversation already in progress. "I can't believe his wife planned this whole thing," one said. "Do you think she has no idea about James and Amanda? God, everyone at the office knows. They're practically inseparable. I heard they were together at that conference in Chicago last month. The poor wife is paying for all this too. Did you see that whine? James always did know how to land on his feet." They fell silent when they noticed me. I straightened my shoulders, fixed my lipstick with a steady hand that surprised me, and walked out without acknowledging them. Somehow, I made it back to the table where dessert was being served as if my world hadn't just imploded. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur. I smiled mechanically, picked at the exquisite chocolate and hazelnut dessert, and nodded at conversations I couldn't follow. When the check arrived, James was deep in conversation with Amanda about some upcoming presentation. Without hesitation, I slid my credit card into the leather folder, signing for an amount that made my stomach clench, especially now. As guests began to leave, many hugged me with an awkward sympathy that confirmed my humiliation had been obvious to everyone. Lauren lingered, squeezing my arm. "Call me tomorrow," she whispered. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The car ride home was suffocating in its silence. James stared out the window, occasionally checking his phone, which lit up repeatedly. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, rehearsing words that kept tangling in my mind. When we finally entered our house, James headed straight for the bar cart in our living room, pouring himself a generous scotch, as if celebrating a successful evening. The casual normalcy of the gesture broke something inside me. "Are you going to explain what happened tonight?" My voice sounded calmer than I felt. James turned, an expression of mild confusion on his face. "What do you mean? Dinner was fantastic. Really impressive, Rachel. Everyone loved it. I'm not talking about the food. I'm talking about Amanda. That toast. You moving seats to be next to her. Everyone watching you two all night, like it was some kind of show they'd seen before. You're overreacting." He took a long sip of his scotch. "Amanda is a close colleague. We work well together, that's all. Don't gaslight me, James. I saw how you looked at her. I heard what you said in that toast. You've never talked about me that way, not even at our wedding. We work closely on important accounts. Of course, we have a connection. It's professional." "Professional?" I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. "Is that why you were touching her all night? Why you told everyone she knows you better than anyone, better than your wife of 12 years? James set his glass down with a sharp click. "This is exactly your problem, Rachel. You're so focused on your own career that you get jealous when I finally have success in mine. You've never understood the demands of my job or the relationships I need to build." "Relationships," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" His face hardened. "I don't have to justify my professional connections to you. Professional connections don't involve late-night texting or weekend conferences in Chicago that you somehow forgot to mention." His eyes widened slightly, confirming what I'd overheard in the bathroom. "You've been checking up on me. I didn't have to. Your affair is apparently office gossip. I was just the last to know." "It's not an affair." His voice rose. "And if you weren't so wrapped up in your precious career and clients, maybe you'd understand that Amanda gets me in ways you never have. She understands my ambitions, my potential. She doesn't just see me as some financial burden to support. The words hit like a physical blow. Financial burden. I supported us because I believed in you. I paid for your MBA, our home tonight's dinner that you used to humiliate me in front of our friends. I did it out of love, not obligation. And you never let me forget it, do you? His voice dripped with sudden venom. Perfect Rachel, with her perfect job and perfect financial planning. Always the responsible one, always in control. Do you have any idea what it's like living in your shadow? Having everyone know my wife makes 3 times what I do. That never mattered to me. I never cared who earned what. But everyone else does. He slammed his glass down. Do you know what they call me at the club, Mr. Rachel Thompson? Like I don't even have my own identity. I stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. So this thing with Amanda, it's about your ego, about proving something. Amanda values my intelligence, my business instincts. She looks up to me. Because she doesn't know you're using your wife's money to impress her. Something ugly flashed across his face. I'm going out. I need to clear my head. He grabbed his jacket and keys. Don't wait up. The front door slammed, leaving me alone in our beautiful home that suddenly felt like a stranger's. I sank onto the sofa, mind racing. Where was he going at midnight? To her. After an hour of staring into space, I did something I'd never done before. I went to James's home office and opened his laptop. We had always respected each other's privacy, but that was before he'd shattered our trust in front of everyone we knew. His password had always been my birthday. It still was, which struck me as both ironic and sad. Once inside, I found hundreds of text messages synced from his phone emails, with Amanda's name in the subject line, calendar invitations for lunches and drinks. One email thread made my blood run cold. They were planning a business trip to Paris next month. First-class tickets, a suite at Le Maurice, dinner reservations at romantic restaurants. I scanned the details, noting the trip coincided with our anniversary. An anniversary James had told me he couldn't celebrate because of an unavoidable business conference in Toronto. As I dug deeper, more painful discoveries emerged. Receipts for jewelry I'd never received. Dinner charges at restaurants I'd never visited. Weekend getaways disguised as networking events. By the time I heard his key in the lock at 3 a.m., I had compiled a folder of evidence that painted an unmistakable picture. This wasn't just an emotional affair or a midlife crisis. This was calculated deception. I'm sure some of you watching have experienced that gut-wrenching moment when you realize your relationship isn't what you thought it was. That moment when all the little inconsistencies suddenly form a clear pattern of betrayal. If you have, drop a comment with a below. And if you're finding this story all too familiar, subscribe to know you're not alone in these experiences. Now let's continue with what happened when James finally came home that night. The following morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. My head pounded from lack of sleep, and the thought of facing clients and colleagues in my current state was unbearable. James had left early, barely speaking to me beyond a terse, "We'll talk later," as he grabbed his briefcase. I sat at our kitchen island staring at the untouched coffee growing cold in my favorite mug when I texted Lauren. We agreed to meet for lunch at a quiet cafe far from my office or any of our usual spots. I couldn't risk running into anyone who had witnessed my humiliation the night before. Lauren arrived before me, already seated in a corner booth, with 2 glasses of wine despite it being barely noon. When she saw my face, she simply opened her arms and I fell into them, fighting back tears I had somehow managed to contain until that moment. "How long have you known?" I asked once I could speak. Lauren sighed, twisting her napkin. "I suspected something a few months ago at the Hendersons' anniversary party. James and Amanda disappeared at the same time for almost half an hour. But I didn't want to say anything without being sure." "But last night you weren't surprised," I pressed. "No," she admitted. "At the Christmas party last month they were obvious. Several people noticed." I almost called you the next day, but I kept thinking it might just be a harmless flirtation that would burn itself out. The realization that my humiliation had been a slow-moving train visible to everyone but me made me feel physically ill. Was I completely blind, Lauren? How did I miss this? You trusted him, she said simply. That's not a character flaw, Rachel. That's what people who love each other are supposed to do. After lunch with Lauren, I called Michael James's closest friend since college. He answered on the first ring, his voice guarded. I need to know what James has told you, I said, skipping any pretense of small talk. A long pause followed. Rachel, I'm not comfortable being in the middle of this. You became in the middle when you watched him disrespect me in front of everyone and said nothing. My voice sharpened. How long, Michael? He sighed heavily. He's been talking about her for months. But I swear I thought it was just professional admiration until recently. The last few weeks, the way he described their relationship changed. I told him he needed to be honest with you. Did he mention Paris? I asked. Another telling silence. He said it was a business trip. It's our anniversary week. Jesus, Rachel. I'm sorry, I didn't know that part. After hanging up with Michael, I called my older sister Diana, who lived in Boston with her family. Diana had always been my rock, the pragmatic voice of reason in any crisis. I explained everything through intermittent tears, from the dinner disaster to the evidence I'd discovered afterward. You need to talk to a lawyer, Diana said immediately. Not because you necessarily want a divorce, but because you need to understand your options, especially with your financial situation. I can't believe we're having this conversation, I whispered. Listen to me, Rachel. This isn't just about the affair. He's spending your money on another woman. He's planning a trip with her on your anniversary. This is calculated deception, not a momentary lapse in judgment. Diana helped me find Stephanie Wilson, an attorney specializing in high-asset divorces. I secured an appointment for the following afternoon, still not entirely convinced I was ready to take such a definitive step, but knowing I needed information. Stephanie's office was sleek but welcoming, with none of the intimidating law library aesthetic I had expected. She listened carefully as I outlined our financial entanglements, occasionally making notes, but mostly maintaining eye contact that conveyed both compassion and sharp intelligence. Based on what you've shared, your financial contributions to the marriage have been substantial, she observed. The home, the investments, his education, your standard of living. In a divorce, you would likely be in a strong position regarding the division of assets. I still can't believe we're discussing divorce, I said, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. 12 years of marriage, and it comes down to this. You don't have to make any decisions today, Stephanie assured me. But it's important you understand your rights and options, especially if he's already diverting funds or making significant financial decisions without your knowledge. I left her office with a folder of information and a heavier heart. On impulse, I called Dr. Matthews, a therapist I had seen briefly years ago during a particularly stressful period at work. Remarkably, she had an opening that afternoon due to a cancellation. In her calm office, surrounded by plants and soft lighting, I poured out the entire story. The birthday dinner, Amanda, the evidence I'd found, James's accusations about my success making him feel inadequate. It sounds like you're experiencing not just the betrayal of infidelity, but a profound disillusionment about who your husband actually is, Dr. Matthews observed. You're grieving the person you thought you knew. I keep wondering if I could have prevented this somehow, I admitted. If I had noticed sooner, or if I'd been less focused on my career. Rachel, from what you've described, you supported James financially and emotionally throughout your marriage. You celebrated his successes and encouraged his growth. His choices are his responsibility, not yours. I left the session with a slightly clearer mind and a follow-up appointment scheduled. As I drove home, I resolved that whatever happened next would be on my terms. I wouldn't confront James in anger or make impulsive decisions based on hurt. I would approach this methodically, gathering information and support until I was ready to face the full truth of my marriage and what remained of it. James returned home late that night, looking surprised to find me sitting calmly at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and his laptop open in front of me. He had clearly expected me to be asleep, allowing him to avoid another confrontation. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Rachel, I'm exhausted. Can this wait until tomorrow?" He loosened his tie, not quite meeting my eyes. "No, it can't." I gestured to the stool across from me. "Sit down, James." Something in my tone must have registered because he complied without further protest. I closed the laptop but kept my hand resting on it, a silent reminder of what I had discovered. "I want you to tell me about Amanda," I said. "The complete truth. How long, how serious, and what exactly you've been spending our money on." "There's nothing to tell. She's a colleague I'm close with." "You're making assumptions based on one dinner and some work emails." I nodded, as if considering this explanation. "So if I called her boyfriend right now, he would say the same thing?" James stiffened visibly. "Her what?" "Mark. The investment banker she's been dating for 2 years. Apparently he travels a lot, which must be convenient for you two." This was a calculated bluff based on a photo I'd seen on her social media, but James's reaction confirmed my suspicion. His face paled slightly. "How did you? Does it matter?" "What matters is that you're lying to me, to her boyfriend, probably to everyone. So I'll ask again, how long has this been going on?" James's demeanor shifted, defensiveness giving way to resignation. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me. Help me understand how my husband ends up planning a romantic Paris getaway with his coworker on our anniversary." His head snapped up. "You went through my emails. After what happened at the dinner, did you really expect me not to? You humiliated me in front of everyone we know, James. You toasted another woman with wine I paid for in a restaurant I reserved months in advance, surrounded by friends who apparently all knew what was happening except me. It started about a year ago," he finally admitted, staring at the counter. "Just lunch meetings at first. Then drinks after work." She understood the pressure I was under, the need to prove myself. She looked up to me, valued my expertise. "And that was intoxicating for your ego." He flinched but didn't deny it. Things evolved gradually. We started texting outside of work hours, meeting on weekends to prepare presentations. It wasn't planned. "When did it become physical?" The question burned my throat. His silence was answer enough. "The Chicago conference," I pressed. A slight nod. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen, James. You made choices. Multiple choices, over and over for months." I opened the laptop and turned it toward him. "Like choosing to buy her a $1,400 bracelet with our joint credit card. Or booking a suite at Les Meurice with the points from my business travel account." His expression hardened. "So you've been spying on me?" "No, I've been discovering who my husband really is. Someone who takes advantage of his wife's financial success while resenting her for it. Someone who uses my money to impress another woman. Someone who plans to spend our anniversary in Paris with his mistress." "You want to talk about money?" His voice rose. "Fine, let's talk about how you've always controlled everything with your perfect financial planning and your bigger salary. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to someone everyone knows is more successful than you? Having people assume I'm riding your coattails. So, this affair is my fault because I'm successful. I supported us so you could pursue your dreams, James. I paid for your MBA. I helped you network for jobs. I never once made you feel lesser for earning less. You didn't have to say it, it was implied in every decision, every vacation you paid for, every time you handed over your credit card at dinner, with that slight smile that said, 'Don't worry, I've got this.' And Amanda appreciates what I bring to the table. She values my insights, my leadership, Does she know you're not actually the big success you've been pretending to be? That those client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants are funded by your wife's bonus? That the luxury gifts come from our joint account? He fell silent, confirming my suspicion. I found the messages, James. The ones where you tell her about closing big accounts that I know for a fact aren't yours. The ones where you promise to take her to Paris using the connections at work that are actually my client relationships. You've been living a double life using my success as your currency. It's not like that, he protested, but weakly. It's exactly like that. And the worst part isn't even the affair or the lying, it's this. I pulled up a text thread I'd discovered between James and Amanda. It's you mocking me to her. Calling me controlling and obsessive about money. Laughing about how I had no idea what you were really doing with that boring financial advisor wife who trusts me completely. James had the decency to look ashamed. Rachel, those messages. I was just venting. It didn't mean anything. It meant everything, James. It showed me exactly what you really think of me and our marriage. What do you want me to say? That I messed up? Fine, I messed up. But you haven't exactly been the perfect wife either. When was the last time you asked about my dreams instead of just writing checks to fund them? When did you last look at me with the admiration you give your high-powered clients? I admired you every day of our marriage until yesterday, I said quietly. I believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. I never saw our financial arrangement as anything but a partnership where I happened to contribute more money while you contributed in other ways. But now I see those other contributions were a fiction I created to justify your taking and taking while giving less and less. James ran his hands through his hair, looking defeated and irritated simultaneously. So what now? You want a divorce, you want to punish me. What I want is for you to leave this house tonight. Stay with a friend, get a hotel, go to Amanda's for all I care. I need space to think about what happens next. But I will not spend another night under the same roof as someone who has betrayed me so completely and still wants to blame me for it. This is my house too, he protested. A house my down payment bought and my mortgage pays for, I countered. But if you prefer, I can be the one to leave. I'll stay at the Four Seasons while I decide how to proceed, and you can explain to Amanda why you suddenly can't afford those dinner reservations you made for tomorrow night. He stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing for the first time that the accommodating, supportive wife he had taken for granted was gone. Without another word, he went upstairs. 30 minutes later, he came down with an overnight bag and left without looking back. I sat alone in the quiet house, feeling oddly calm, despite everything. The worst had happened. The illusion of my marriage had shattered completely. But in its place was something unexpected: clarity. The day after James moved out, I began methodically securing my financial life. I made an appointment with Gregory Peters, the financial planner at my firm, who specialized in divorce cases. Though I hadn't definitely decided on divorce, I needed to understand exactly where I stood financially. Based on the statements you've provided, I'm concerned about some recent investment activity in your joint accounts, Gregory said, pointing to several transactions on his computer screen. These particular funds are extremely high risk, not something I would have recommended given your stated financial goals. I didn't authorize those investments, I said, leaning closer to examine the transactions. That's what I suspected. In the last 6 months, there's been a pattern of increasingly speculative investments from your joint accounts, totaling just over $120,000. My stomach dropped. That was money I'd been saving for years, earmarked for our future. Can we reverse these transactions? Some of them potentially, others have already lost significant value. I recommend freezing all joint accounts immediately to prevent further financial damage. By the end of our meeting, I had a clear action plan. I opened new accounts in my name only and transferred my direct deposits there. I froze our joint credit cards and documented every asset we owned. I changed the passwords on all my financial accounts and requested credit reports to ensure no new accounts had been opened in my name. My second meeting with attorney Stephanie Wilson was more focused now that I had concrete financial information. I brought copies of all the evidence I had gathered from account statements to the emails and texts, documenting James's affair and financial deceptions. "This is quite comprehensive," Stephanie noted, reviewing the files. "The financial documentation especially will be valuable if we proceed with a divorce filing." "What are the next steps?" I asked. "We can file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, or in this case, we could cite adultery with the evidence you've gathered. Given the financial aspects, I would recommend a forensic accountant to ensure we have full disclosure of all assets and any potential hidden accounts. And if he contests it, based on the evidence of financial impropriety and infidelity, his position would be weak. Most likely he would seek a settlement rather than a prolonged court battle that would expose his behavior." I nodded, processing this information. "I need a few days to decide." The weight of these decisions drove me to seek solitude. I took a personal day and went hiking in the mountains where James and I had spent so many happy weekends during our early marriage. As I climbed the familiar trail alone, physical exertion clearing my mind, I began to see patterns I had been blind to for years. I had lost myself in supporting James, measuring my worth by how well I could help him achieve his goals, while putting my own dreams on a shelf. I had accepted his growing emotional distance as the natural evolution of a long marriage, rather than the warning sign it was. I had written checks instead of asking questions when things felt off. That evening, I called Eliza, a close friend from college I had gradually lost touch with over the years. James had never particularly liked her, finding her too opinionated and intense. Now I understood why she would have seen through him instantly. "Rachel, it's been ages." Eliza's voice was warm with surprise. "Too long," I agreed. "I've missed you." "Is everything okay? You sound different." I found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out in a cathartic rush. Eliza listened without interruption, and when I finally fell silent, her response was characteristically direct. "I never liked him," she said simply. "He always seemed to be performing, especially around your successful friends. But I kept my mouth shut because you seemed happy." "I thought I was," I admitted. "So what now, Rach? What do you want, not for James or your marriage, but for yourself?" The question startled me. What did I want? I had been so focused on salvaging my marriage or planning the practicalities of ending it that I hadn't considered what might come after. The following day, I had dinner with my parents who had driven in from Portland after my tearful phone call. Over my mother's homemade lasagna in my dining room, I shared the full story. "We never fully trusted him," my father admitted, looking pained. "He seemed insincere somehow. But you were so in love and we didn't want to interfere." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. "Would you have listened?" my mother asked gently. "You were determined to support him, to help him find his path. It was one of the things we most admired about you, your loyalty and generosity. We just worried it might be misplaced with James." Their honest assessment was another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As they helped me clear the dinner dishes, my father placed a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, Rachel, we're behind you 100%. If that means divorce, we'll help you through it. If it means trying to rebuild, we'll support that too. But make the decision for yourself, not for anyone else." Over the next few days, I threw myself into reclaiming my home and my life. I rearranged furniture, donated James's abandoned clothes to charity, and rehung art I had always loved, but James had dismissed as too abstract. I reconnected with old friends, scheduled long-deferred medical checkups, and signed up for a photography class I had been interested in for years. Each small act of self-reclamation strengthened my resolve. I was not just James's wife or the financial provider for our lifestyle. I was Rachel Thompson, and I deserved better than what my marriage had become. A week after James moved out, a colleague innocently mentioned a client meeting where James had apparently presented himself as the lead on an account I knew he had minimal involvement with. It was the final confirmation of something I had begun to suspect. James had been exaggerating his professional success not just to Amanda but to everyone. That night I made my decision. I would not try to salvage a marriage built on deception and disrespect. I would not continue to fund someone else's fantasy life. And I would not go quietly into divorce, allowing James to craft a narrative that protected his reputation at my expense. I called Stephanie the next morning to formally begin divorce proceedings. Then I started planning how to ensure that everyone in our social and professional circles knew exactly who James Reynolds really was and what he had done to the wife who had supported him for 12 years. My approach to revenge was methodical, much like my approach to financial planning. I didn't want a messy emotional confrontation that would make me appear unhinged or vindictive. I wanted precision impact and irrefutable evidence that would leave James no room to spin a self-serving narrative. First, I consulted with Melissa Chen, our firm's PR specialist who handled crisis management for high-profile clients. Under the guise of seeking advice for a client situation, I outlined my scenario without naming names. So, hypothetically, if someone wanted to ensure the truth about a professional deception came to light in the most effective way possible, what would you recommend? I asked after explaining the basics. Melissa leaned forward, eyes sharp with interest. Hypothetically speaking, I would recommend a targeted disclosure to key individuals, rather than a broad public announcement. More surgical, less messy, and ultimately more devastating, because it reaches exactly the people whose opinions matter most. Her advice aligned perfectly with what I had been considering. My next step was setting up a meeting with Edward Donovan, James's boss at the marketing firm. I presented it as a professional courtesy, offering investment consultation as a thank you for their firm's business relationship with James. Edward accepted immediately, apparently impressed that the wife of one of his team members was a senior financial advisor. We met for lunch at an upscale restaurant near his office. After discussing legitimate investment strategies for about 20 minutes, I carefully steered the conversation. I understand James has been doing exceptional work on the Miller account, I said, casually referencing the client I'd heard mentioned repeatedly at the birthday dinner. James, no, that's primarily Amanda's account. He's been supporting her on it, but she's the lead. Edward looked slightly confused. Oh, I must have misunderstood. James spoke about it as if he was heading the strategy. I maintained an expression of mild confusion. That's not accurate, Edward said slowly, his brow furrowing. Is that what he told you? Among other things. I paused, deliberately. Edward, this is uncomfortable, but I feel I should mention something as a professional courtesy. I've recently discovered that James and Amanda have been involved in a relationship that goes well beyond professional collaboration. I'm initiating divorce proceedings as a result. Edward's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. I had no idea. Our firm has strict policies about disclosing workplace relationships, especially between team members working on the same accounts. I thought that might be the case. I'm not trying to create problems, but I felt you should be aware, particularly given some financial irregularities I've discovered related to client entertainment expenses. By the time our lunch concluded, Edward was scheduling an urgent meeting with HR and promising a full investigation into James's conduct and expense reports. With that foundation laid, I moved to the centerpiece of my plan, a second dinner at Elysee, exactly 1 month after the disastrous birthday celebration. I made the reservation under the pretense of wanting to thank our friends for their support during a difficult time. I invited the same guest list, including Amanda, but with one significant addition: Mark Davis, Amanda's boyfriend. Finding Mark had been surprisingly easy. A mutual connection on LinkedIn, a carefully worded message expressing concern about Amanda's excessive work hours with my husband, and an invitation to discuss the situation over dinner. His acceptance suggested he already had suspicions about Amanda's late nights at the office. I ensured James remained unaware of Mark's invitation. As far as James knew, this dinner was my attempt at maintaining social connections during our separation. He agreed to attend, likely assuming it would help preserve his reputation among our friends. The evening of the dinner, I arrived early to ensure everything was perfect. I wore a striking red dress I had purchased specifically for this occasion, projecting confidence and self-possession rather than the wounded vulnerability I had displayed a month earlier. As guests arrived, I greeted each, warmly accepting their awkward condolences about my separation with gracious composure. James appeared visibly tense when he arrived, his eyes darting around the room, as if assessing potential allies and threats. When Amanda arrived, her momentary look of panic upon seeing me as the host was deeply satisfying. She had clearly expected James to be in charge of the evening. I welcomed her with a warm smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Amanda, so glad you could join us again. I believe your boyfriend Mark is already here. Let me introduce you." I guided her to where Mark stood, chatting with Lauren, watching as recognition and alarm transformed her face. Throughout the appetizer course, I maintained the persona of the gracious hostess, while James grew increasingly agitated, especially when seated directly across from Mark and Amanda. The tension at the table was palpable, with conversation strained and artificial. As the main course was being served, I stood and gently tapped my glass with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Your support during this challenging time has meant everything to me." I smiled, making eye contact with each guest. "When we gathered here last month to celebrate James's birthday, I thought we were honoring 12 years of partnership and mutual respect. I've since learned that wasn't entirely accurate." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat as I continued. "I believe in transparency and truth, which is why I wanted to share something with all of you, especially those who've been part of our journey together." I nodded to the maitre d', who dimmed the light slightly as a screen descended from the ceiling. I had arranged this technical setup in advance, paying a premium for the theatrical element. I've prepared a brief presentation I'm calling "The Real James Reynolds, A Study in Deception." The first slide appeared showing James and Amanda at a hotel in Chicago, his arm around her waist in the lobby. The timestamp clearly showed the date of the business conference he had attended 3 months earlier. This is from the Palmer House Hilton, where James was supposedly attending a marketing symposium alone. I advanced to the next slide, showing a receipt for a Tiffany bracelet purchased on our joint credit card. And this is what he charged to our account that same weekend. Slide after slide appeared, each more damning than the last. Text message exchanges, where James disparaged me to Amanda. Credit card statements showing lavish dinners and gifts. Email confirmations for the Paris trip scheduled during our anniversary. But perhaps most disturbing was discovering that James has been presenting himself as far more successful professionally than he actually is. I displayed an email where James had taken credit for Amanda's work on the Miller account, directly contradicting what her boss had confirmed to me at our lunch meeting. He's been building his relationship with Amanda on the same foundation of deception that ultimately undermined our marriage. Throughout the presentation, I maintained a calm, almost clinical tone, as if presenting a particularly interesting case study to colleagues, rather than exposing my husband's betrayal. The effect was powerful precisely because I showed no anger or hysteria that could be dismissed as a woman scorned. "I've filed for divorce," I concluded as the lights came back up. "And I've provided copies of James's financial misrepresentations to the appropriate people at his firm. I'm not sharing this to hurt anyone, but because the truth matters and because some of you here tonight deserve to know exactly who you've been dealing with." I looked directly at Mark, who sat rigid with anger, and then at Amanda, whose face had drained of all color. "I've already settled the bill for tonight's dinner. Please stay and enjoy the excellent dessert selection. I'll be leaving now as I have an early flight tomorrow for a much-needed vacation." I picked up my clutch and stood. "James, I suggest you start looking for a good attorney. Mine is exceptional." The stunned silence as I walked out was the sweetest validation I could have imagined. Later, Lauren told me that James had attempted to follow me only to be blocked by Mark, who had several pointed questions about his girlfriend's relationship with a married colleague. James's boss had immediately excused himself to make a phone call, looking deeply troubled. As I drove home that night, I felt no triumph or vengeful satisfaction, only a profound sense of closure. I had not just exposed James's deception, I had reclaimed my narrative and my dignity in front of the same people who had witnessed my humiliation. The story of our marriage would not be told on his terms but on mine, the truth with receipts to prove it. The aftermath of my calculated exposure unfolded with a satisfying predictability. Within days, James was placed on administrative leave pending an ethics investigation at his firm. Amanda was transferred to a different department and office location, effectively ending their daily collaboration. Their Paris getaway was cancelled, the non-refundable deposits forfeited. James made several desperate attempts to contact me in the weeks that followed. His initial angry texts accusing me of destroying his career gradually gave way to pleading messages about how much he missed me, how he'd made a terrible mistake, how Amanda meant nothing compared to our years together. I responded to none of them, communicating only through my attorney. The evidence I had gathered made the divorce proceedings remarkably straightforward. James had no legitimate grounds to contest my claims, and his financial impropriety with our joint accounts significantly weakened his position in negotiations. 3 weeks after the revelation dinner, I moved out of our house into a luxury apartment in the downtown Arts District, a neighborhood I had always loved, but James had dismissed as too urban. My new home featured floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic city views, a rooftop garden, and walking distance to galleries and restaurants I had long wanted to explore. The divorce was finalized in record time, with the settlement heavily favoring me given the documented infidelity and financial misconduct. James received far less than the standard division of assets would have dictated, particularly after the forensic accountant discovered he had been siphoning funds into a separate account for months. My professional life flourished as I redirected the energy I had previously spent supporting James's career. I accepted a promotion I had been hesitant about while married, concerned it would further imbalance our relationship. The new position came with increased responsibilities, a significant salary bump, and equity partnership track. Dr. Matthews continued to be an invaluable support as I processed the end of my marriage. "You're grieving not just the relationship you lost, but the relationship you thought you had," she observed during one session. "That's a particular kind of betrayal that takes time to heal from." "The strangest part is that I don't miss him," I confessed. "I miss the idea of being married, of having a partner. But the actual day-to-day reality of being with James, I don't find myself longing for that at all." That suggests you had already begun disconnecting from the relationship before it officially ended. Many people describe a similar experience after leaving situations where they were undervalued or taken advantage of. The relief outweighs the loss. My relationships with friends and family deepened in unexpected ways. Lauren and I became even closer, often meeting for weekend brunches or impromptu movie nights. My sister Diana visited more frequently, bringing my nieces for city adventures in my new neighborhood. My parents seemed relieved to see me reclaiming my independence, often commenting on how I seemed more like myself than I had in years. 4 months after moving into my new apartment, I ran into Thomas Mercer at a photography exhibit. We had been friends in college, briefly dated before I met James, and then gradually lost touch. He was now a successful architect recently returned to the city after years working abroad. "Rachel, is that you?" His voice carried across the gallery, warm with pleased surprise. We spent hours catching up over coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into a standing weekly date, exploring different restaurants around the city. Thomas was everything. James wasn't genuinely interested in my work, secure in his own success, and refreshingly straightforward. "I always wondered what happened to us back then," he admitted, during our third dinner together. "We had such a connection, and then suddenly, you were with that marketing guy, and I just faded into the background." "James was very good at making me believe he was what I wanted," I said, after a thoughtful pause. "I think I was so focused on the future he painted that I stopped seeing what was right in front of me." As spring turned to summer, my new life took on a rhythm entirely of my own making. I traveled to Italy on a solo trip I had always wanted to take, but James had repeatedly postponed. I stood alone in the Uffizi Gallery, marveling at Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and felt a profound sense of freedom and possibility. On my last morning in Florence, a text from James appeared on my phone. "I made the mistake of my life letting you go. Nothing has been right since you left. Please, can we just talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the birthday dinner 6 months earlier, the champagne toast to Amanda, the months of deception that followed. Then I deleted it without responding, tucked my phone away, and headed to the airport for my flight home. As I settled into my seat and the plane began its ascent, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, supportive, accommodating, willfully blind to the red flags in my marriage. The journey from that person to who I was now had been painful but necessary. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something far more valuable. A life authentically mine, filled with people who genuinely appreciated me, opportunities I had denied myself, and a newfound trust in my own instincts and worth. Sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most liberating beginnings. I lost a husband, but I found myself, and in the end, that was the more valuable discovery. I hope my story resonated with some of you who've experienced betrayal or had to rebuild after a relationship ended. If you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear how you found your strength in the comments below. Was there a moment when you realized you deserved better? Did revenge help you heal, or did you choose a different path? Please subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine, about finding justice and rebuilding after betrayal. And if you know someone who might need to hear that there's life after deception, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly deserve.